You are now listening to the Low Hanging Fruits podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
Chop, chop, chop.
And we're here.
We are live. Well, we're live. You are not.
We're alive.
No, we're live recording.
Yeah.
You are listening to this in the future, potentially thousands of years in the future.
You're listening to All Things Obunkled.
Yes. The most important election of our lifetimes, the third most important election of our lifetimes. And we lost it.
And yeah, it seems like
Well,
things
not
are
we.
looking a little grim. Hey everybody, I am Chariot, or Lauren.
I'm Bang Duck. I'm a private account on Twitter that you've probably only seen screenshots of my tweets at this point.
A mysterious fellow.
Yes.
Yeah, this is going to be... I guess we should start from the beginning. This is our election recap.
Yeah.
Leading into this, I've had a lot of feelings about it. A lot of very gay transgender feelings about this. If I can be
Okay.
my identitarian self for a moment. The experience of the last two elections has been truly insanifying my brain. I am Joker-fied. I am the Joker.
It has been
I'm
a
the Joker,
grueling
baby.
12 years, just as somebody who intrinsically wants to be interested in politics. It is difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I think basically everything from the last couple of years of Obama onward has been just deeply disturbing, and
And that was a long time ago now.
This, yeah, I'm gonna say a lot of not overly generous things about liberals and Democrats here. I think is kind of what I'm anticipating, and I want to head that off at the pass and kind of temper it by saying that I have a lot of liberal friends. I have a lot of people who are blue no matter who people who I know, and that's just who they are. It's their political input. Some of them are not very politically activated, others are, and that just happens to also be how they vote. My experience with this has been sort of watching as I am told by not everybody that I know, because I found some other crazy people in the past few years who I really appreciate. And but for the most part, my experience has been getting told that I'm insane by most people, and then having people like essentially just kind of do preemptive like end zone dances when they feel like they've got to win. And there's this air of like, hey, the system works, and then we fumble. And that is to be expected. I think when liberals talk about elections, the most important election of our lifetime, the experience that I am having right now is as long as we have a far-right movement, or even the potential to have a far-right movement, the truth as I see it is that the liberal thesis for how to handle this problem is chiefly to juggle it, to you keep the ball up in the air for another 4 years, or another 2, depending on whether you're counting midterm elections in America. But as far as the presidency goes, it's every 4 years, and then you pass it back up. And when I was a kid, we used to play a lot of games like this with my cousins. I came from a big Catholic family on my dad's side. We used to play a lot of games like this at family parties, where if you had a balloon, that was filled with just regular air, not a helium balloon, you would bat it up into the air with your hand, and then somebody else would have to keep it from touching the ground. Or we'd play the floor is lava. And that is how I feel with any potential discrimination towards queer people, with mass deportations of immigrants. Remember, I mean, the rhetoric around illegals and illegal immigrants is such that it is aesthetically law and order rhetoric, but anybody can become illegal. Like the hidden value there is, if we make your stuff illegal, you're going to be illegal, And already we're hearing from people about how they want to go after DACA and Dreamers, and we knew this. So I think it should have been the rhetoric that, like, this is what these people do, and a lot of the American right, in a way that liberals have not been able to fully contend with, they just lie. They just lie and they lie and they lie. And I think after Biden won 4 years ago, there was this idea that we can beat them back. That was the feeling. And for 4 years, the liberals who I had to contend with were very smug about, liberalism being more viable than leftism. And as far as possessing political power and who has it and what they do with it, they were right, but they're right as long as the ball is up in the air, Like, you can't play the floor is lava with the Holocaust. It doesn't work like that. It's a fundamentally immoral proposition. I understand people using what levers of power they have. The issue that I've had is being talked down to like I'm a crazy person who should be disregarded by people whose thesis is suicidal. What is the thesis of liberal America other than we're just going to keep trying to float this problem until we can't anymore, and then there's no alternatives, and we just lose, and we lose. And by we mean minority groups, and by lose we mean repression, illegality, deportation, maybe death. The only difference being, like, is it individuated? Is it people killing themselves? Is it people incidentally dying? Is it individual stochastic hate crimes? Or is it mass death? That's the scale that those consequences operate on. And I think the insensitivity on the issue is why I'm so heated, and I'm going to try to rein that in. But I have been talked to like I was a crazy person for a long time, and I feel like the world is crazy.
I definitely feel where you're coming from with that. I think the sort of when you look at this, I think since 2016, there's been this sort of growing consciousness that the sort of the two wings of the Obama coalition, which are the centrist Democrats and the far left, there's a sense that these wings have come apart and no longer really barely coexist in the same party. I mean, you have left-wing Democrats like Rashida Tlaib accusing, I believe quite credibly, the president of supporting genocide. I believe he's conducting genocide. So when she says that, I think it's accurate. But a political party that has, wings of itself that are on such divergent political places, right? It's a recipe for a very strange kind of politics, and the Democrats could keep that rolling. It feels like since 2016, for the past 8 years, the Democratic coalition has been essentially led by center-left, led by, or even the center, and tailed by the left and the far left, in as much as this political organization is opposed to stuff like Donald Trump, is opposed to sort of the ugly American cohort, I'm going to call them. Right, it's the antisocial, politically far right, cruel, people who drive, lifted trucks 40 miles over the speed limit in a school zone, right? Like that's the Trump coalition, and the left has been kept together on the idea that there's a group of people who want to have a country, want to have a society, want to exist in a in a public space together without actually going to war over nonsense. And every time the Republicans win, that society has to do like a big look at itself. A big question mark comes up over, and it is now very geographically polarized too. Like if you live in a city, you probably are part of this left wing American society, which has its own, social mores. I live in California, or I'm in California right now. I live in Oregon, and these are blue states, and there's not going to be a Republican governor or a Republican legislature in California in the foreseeable future, and so the politics of California are pretty moderate, but it's a different tone, it's a different direction. And the Democrats can really credibly like say, look, this is a vision of the world that is better than living like they do in Mississippi. This is better than being in Texas. This is and it is, but only as long as you can win. And that was the big gamble of the Kamala Harris campaign was how far to the right can we go? How far can we play to suburban white sort of conservative voters? How many of these people can we bring into our coalition? And the answer, it looks like, is none, or almost none. And she lost really, really badly.
Yeah.
And the campaign failed. And so we want to take a look at that. I think a lot of people have offered their explanations for that campaign's failure. I want to look at some of them, talk about some of them, and sort of offer our own visions of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the big open question, the unknowable question is like where to now? And in order to kind of start to understand that, we need to start to understand how we got here and what happened. So, I guess before we get into anything that we've heard specifically floated as theses, I want to talk a little bit about stuff that I've seen in the energy just vaguely of how people talk about this that I think we can kind of write off. Because there are a few things that I think are non-factors. I don't think this was Jill Stein voters, or any third-party voter. I mean, RFK was still on the ballot. I think that prior to the election, the thesis was that if RFK was running, it would cut into Trump's base. So you'd think that would, in some places, wherever he was on the ballot, that would have been a boon to Harris. And of course, she did win Illinois. But, I just... It's hard for me to look at this and say, yeah, that those very small numbers were really what did it. And I remember when Hillary Clinton lost in some of the same places where Harris lost, people were trying to ask questions about like the Rust Belt and why that happened. And a lot of the Democrat base were really into vote shaming the third party voters. I think psychologically there's something human about seeing somebody do something and shaming that action as opposed to shaming an inaction, because the person who literally did not do something is going to feel like they're being shamed for doing nothing wrong, and also like they're not counted, so they're not going to show up in the same way in the stats about like who voted and how. Like exit polling is not going to reflect anything beyond the fact that they were not there. So I think that sort of thing to me is just so far below the other concerns that I'm not really interested, frankly. And I think that similarly, I've seen a few people take this opportunity to punch left. I've seen people say, "Oh, this was," Hassan's chat didn't vote. I've seen people say, all these socialists didn't show up. I mean, That's the basic catch-22 of being a left-winger who votes Democrat, is like, when the Democrats win, they don't need to offer you anything, because when they ran, they didn't offer you anything and you voted for them anyway. And when the Democrats lose, they get to blame you because they feel held back. And I think a lot of that is just social resentment. I don't think it has anything to do with the statistics. I don't think it has anything to do with what really happened. I think a lot of people really want to fight. You know, they get activated. And when people swing their fists, who do they hit? The person in melee range, right? And for liberals and for progressive-minded people, that's left-wingers more often than it's the far right. People hurt the people who are close to them when they're angry. And, you know, I think it's the case for people from marginalized groups too. You know, when transgender people, I see it all the time, when queer people get activated and angry, frequently that gets channeled as divisiveness among other queer people. And you'd think logically that it would be directed against the source, but the source is out of reach, and such a powerful thing, at least in the moment, consistently, that it almost feels like you can't do anything. So you fight the problem that's closer and more manageable, which is other vulnerable people. So that stuff, I think, is kind of beneath us, and I don't want to take any pot shots at anybody who's not statistically relevant, or who, you know, we would be doing it for the wrong reasons. And you know, we're going to talk about some of the other ideas that we've seen floated. I don't know if you wanted to introduce any.
There's a couple of ideas and explanations that I think have been put forward that don't conform to the way the race actually went. I think it, and I'll justify this later. I think it is true that probably the left did not show out for Kamala Harris. Well, we'll have to wait and see the ultimate voting. But and before we go in, I want to say that looking at polling statistics is kind of like staring into the Necronomicon. Like it's only going to drive you insane. The problem is that so few people vote out of the total potential voter base.
Yeah.
And the reasons they vote, especially the sort of the 20% of like variance of voters, people who might vote, might not, they often don't have crystallized ideologies. They don't have strong loyalties. So if you want to create like a picture of like, Kamala Harris ditched like a specific group of people, it's going to be very hard to like actually prove that. But my feeling is, and this is substantiated by the fact that a lot of the places where Kamala Harris lost the most in the popular vote were blue states, and that a lot of people elected Democrats and then just didn't vote for her, is that she lost some part of the Democratic base. She very clearly lost Arab Americans and Muslims. And I think along with that went leftists and committed like liberals who, and I think adding on to this, she also lost people who might have been convinced, like people who might have been convinced to vote and just kind of like didn't get engaged. People who ambiently didn't like Trump but felt like we've already had 4 years of Trump and the country is sort of still here, you know. So 4 more years, how bad, you know. It just didn't feel worth it to buy into a campaign like this. So I guess that's sort of a long-winded way to say don't look too deep into the polling crosstabs. Don't look too deep into the vote results, because I think bigger stories are going to be are something you can see in a big way is going to be more relevant. And also, a lot of the time, what shows up as a big swing on the map is not actually like people changing their minds and deciding to vote for Donald Trump. Donald Trump's
Absolutely.
numbers declined. I think Donald Trump's coalition is still mostly together. And the reason Kamala Harris lost is her coalition didn't stay together. And so I think there were probably very few like crossover Biden to Trump voters. Like Trump didn't convince new voters. He convinced old voters, but Kamala Harris couldn't convince her party's old voters. And that's in a way that other candidates in her party could convince their voters.
I think, yeah, I guess the two things that I want to say about that are to flavor my earlier comment about left-wingers and making the difference. I think there's leftists and then there's leftists, you know, like there's that like Twitter socialist who, you know, we've all dunked on, you know, just fill in the blank with whoever it is you listening to this, whoever you happen to hate. I don't think whether those people voted really is indicative of anything statistically. I do think that there are Americans who can be activated politically who aren't. And differences in turnout, I think, show that. Whether that happens on policy or rhetoric or whatever it is, I don't know. But I think my thesis has always been that the Democrats have a turnout-based victory plan, basically. I don't know if it's their plan, but it's the viable plan. I think there's been a sense for a long time among left-wingers that you need to get more people to show up. You need to get more people invested. I don't know. I keep asking myself this, what were they thinking? But every time I see somebody, you know, some liberal person mock a left-wing person or condescend to them, my thoughts are always twofold. First of all, I tend to disagree because it's who I am. Second of all, I think it tends to send a very bad message. You know, when people, staffers and people working for the DNC and people at the convention were mocking the uncommitted movement, when they were reading off the names and the ages of the children who were killed in Gaza, and they were like, you know, repeating back their words to them in like a mocking tone, laughing. Those people who were coming out of the convention, those videos of those liberals have gone kind of semi, like not viral, but like viral within online left-wing spaces. I don't know if I think that is meaningful for the reason that it reached those spaces. I think that it's meaningful for the reason that it's indicative of a real attitude. Liberals are very entitled. They think because they're right that people will vote for them, because if they didn't vote for them, then they would be wrong. But like, you know, if
It doesn't work
up,
that way.
Yeah, it does. It's not. It's an election, you know. It just doesn't work like that.
And this sort of leads into my theory of Harris's loss, which we can get into. But I think after I want to talk about the Pod Save America reaction.
Oh, yes, please, yeah.
I would first, and then we can get into like theories of why she lost.
Yeah. So I guess
this is all just sort of background to like lead the listener into why we think it's important to talk about sort of the heart of the Democratic Party, where the Democratic Party is standing, and what the results of that are politically. And so I think Pod Save America is a good place to start with that, because it's mostly like Obama staffers. They're people who got security clearances. They're people who got into the White House. They're dedicated. They're the kind of people, and they're also progressives. So they're the kind of people that, in theory, the Democratic Party is organized around, and they're a little bit on the outside of it. But they're very much a sort of a loyal opposition, in as much as they are an opposition.
Yeah, well, I think they're a good bridge to kind of to watch, because they connect kind of the perspectives of the insiders to the popular perspectives of the people outside. I was surprised when I found out how many people watched them. I guess I shouldn't be, but I've heard a lot about them. I've seen the things that they say float around before, and I've had my own feelings on that. And checking their like subscriber count on stuff is very surprising. People really, some people somewhere really seem to like that. So I do think it's worth talking about them for both of those reasons. The thing that I guess first thing that they kind of bring up, and the first thing that I think connects to...
We should what we're watching here, which is a YouTube video.
Yeah, so this is a YouTube video. I don't know if it's one of their official, like, numbered episodes of the podcast show. Let me check. It's how Donald Trump defeated Kamala Harris in the 2024 presidential election on the Pod Save America YouTube channel. They do a little roundtable retrospective on the campaign and Harris's loss. So what is it? It's a few days old now. But the thing about watching that for me is they bring up the economic stuff very early, and god damn, it's so funny. The thing that I talked about in the intro about liberal smugness and the condescension is, I remember, like that the Gene Wilder quote from Blazing Saddles. I can't remember how it goes exactly, but he's describing the rural people of America. He's like, hardworking, honest people, blah blah blah. Morons. Some liberals were dunking on some morons on Twitter as recently as a couple years ago. It was during the Biden administration, and I was watching this unfold, and the big thing was, how expensive are groceries? What's the economy looking like? What's inflation like? And the theme of that conversation was a bunch of people felt like the economy was doing really badly, and the liberals had a lot of statistics to show how they were right. Actually, the economy here's a bunch of reasons why it's really good. And I think the temptation there is to say, well, maybe they misread the statistics. Maybe they thought it said something it didn't say. But I actually think something else happened there that's even more important, regardless of whether that's true, which is that if somebody thinks they're in pain and you tell them no, it's the wrong response, even if you're right. Even if you have a point, like I said, morons. A lot of those people were making stupid points when I would see that stuff get shared around online. Whether it was a video or a tweet or whatever it was, it was people who did not know what they were talking about. If you ask an American what inflation is and why it happens, most of them won't be able to tell you. They see a price change and they think, oh my God, they printed too much money with the money machine. Joe Biden did this to us. How dare he? That's basically as complicated as it gets for most of them most of the time. And to look at people like that and to say, actually, you just don't understand the issue. You're not really hurting. I think it's a losing message in a bigger way than they could have anticipated. To run on things are fine actually a second time, it's basically the Hillary America is already great kind of message. And they seem to have not even realized that they were doing it because it was almost instinctive. It was like, we have to fact check people and correct them and let them know that things are fine actually.
And so the Pod Save America people build. I think I want us to go to this episode here because they build that economic argument. They basically build the argument that the economy was good, but inflation was high, and so every government that has high inflation loses the election. And so what happened was that Kamala Harris was this is sort of a narrative that I've seen going around more wonky lib circles, which is that Kamala Harris had a really tough election campaign. She only had 100 days. She clawed back her favorables. They say she clawed herself to within -4 on the economy. which I think is supposed to be good, and that she ran a great campaign. All her staff ran a great campaign. The economic favorables were just not there. There was no option to do anything differently because Biden had to do this inflationary policy, and so we kind of don't need to learn any lessons.
Right. Yeah.
Is
I
what
mean, it was fate. There you go.
it was fate. We were, how mightily we strove against the gods, alas.
Yeah. Zeus empowered Donald Trump, and he won.
Um, and my feeling on this is that Kamala Harris is that the Democratic Party has lost expertise, which is terrible for a party that wants to be a party of experts. It's a party of currently it's a party of more well-paid people. It's a party of higher income, educated people. There's a certain type of person that I'm sure you've met, which is the very, very lovely, kind Democrat liberal wonk. Somebody who cares a lot about policy. People who care a lot about the good name of Hillary Clinton. They might have in kinder years, but sort of a wonk. Someone who wants to get in the weeds. Oh, Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act was actually really good, and here's why. And I think that the Democrats definitely, there's sort of a force majeure going on. It's definitely hard to pass any kind of economic legislation through a Republican Congress. But also, on the other hand, here, the liberals are not good enough at the economy to be running as professional wonks. They're not good at managing foreign policy. To be running as professional wonks. They're not good enough at managing, the political science of political cleavages across this country to be running as poli sci wonks running a wonky issues based campaign. And in fact, if you look at Kamala Harris's campaign, what her campaign put out, it was almost entirely negative messaging. It was almost in the old days, politicians used to not run negative campaigns. People used to say, they would get up on stage and I ran a totally positive campaign. I will commit to running a totally positive campaign. And they did this because, not because they were nice people, but because voters did not reward candidates who pushed only attack ads. Towards the end of the campaign, a lot of what was happening on Kamala Harris's Twitter, the official Kamala Harris Twitter account, was just posting Donald Trump, clips from Donald Trump rallies with the implication being that he's gone off the deep end, which, he's not he's kind of a stupid guy. He likes to ramble. True, but this is their campaign messaging is entirely get a load of this guy. Isn't he stupid?
Yeah, and I think if we're expecting Americans to reject Donald Trump based on their ability to intuitively reason their way into why he's wrong just by saying oh, look at this, how bad is this? I don't have a lot of faith in that particular strategy. There needs to be some kind of contextualization, I think. And
sort of the other leg of my argument is that Kamala Harris is not a good politician. Kamala Harris, and to me, the moment that sort of crystallizes this or exemplifies this is when she's asked on a talk show or an interview what her plan for trans rights is, what her thoughts about transgender rights are, and Kamala Harris immediately jumps to saying we should follow the law, and it's such a nonsensical answer. The interviewer attempts to sort of follow this up, tries to save it for her, because the interviewer says, I know the Donald Trump campaign has tried to define you. How do you define yourself as? And this is, in terms of an interview question, this is T-ball. This is, you've heard of softball questions. This is T-ball. The interviewer knows that Kamala Harris's campaign is struggling to identify itself. They know that Kamala Harris is struggling to define herself. So they give her a question where her campaign can define herself on an issue that is a pretty, center part of the Democrats, something that Republicans have talked about a lot, that Democrats have hit back on to say, look, we're different. We stand for another America. And then when Kamala Harris fumbles it the first time, the interviewer goes back to give her a second shot and says and explains the stakes of the argument to her. And Kamala Harris fumbles it a second time. And that's not something that you can do as a politician. Another example is when she was on The View and she was famously asked, like, what differentiates your campaign from Joe Biden's? She didn't have an answer. She didn't have an answer for several days. It was on the news. Kamala Harris struggles to define her campaign. And these are basic questions. This is a question about something that is in your party platform, if I recall correctly, and a question about the very question of why are you running for president, and she can't answer either of these questions. This is little league. This is a really terrible thing for a politician to have to deal with, and I think her failure at rhetoric, her failure to think on her feet, really, more than anything else, cost her the election. I think with all the pivots to the center, she could have still pulled it out. I think a good politician, a great politician, could have taken this idea of welding Republican leaning suburban whites to the Democratic Party and turned that into a winning coalition. Kamala Harris couldn't do basic politics, couldn't do basic public speaking in a way that is a real atrocity for the Democratic Party to not be able to realize.
Yeah, I mean, I guess about Kamala Harris individually, the Kamala Harris primary campaign when she ran in the Democrat primary in the previous election, was running ads to, first of all, a campaign based on the reporting that it's gotten, which was insanely mishandled. But it was running ads as early as before the actual 2020 election year started. So they, like, the first vote had not been cast yet. And they were already running ads asking people to take an online poll to see whether they wanted her to be Joe Biden's running mate. With the idea, I guess, being that would be her path forward. That some people run for president because they want to sell a book. That this was her. That was, I guess, her book, is getting on the Biden campaign, and she did it. So as a career move, good job. Other than that, I think the inability to get any energy behind her was exemplified in how much of it she lost when she could have had it. There was a moment, I think, in this election. People say she didn't have that much time to run a campaign. In other countries, elections do not last always as long as American elections do. So the idea that you couldn't connect with people in that time frame, as much as I think it was a challenge relative to the opportunity afforded Donald Trump, I do also think that a couple months or a few months is enough time. And that would be, I would locate that feeling in the Democratic Party, which I think fairly the Pod Save guys kind of also do with Biden and with the idea of putting Biden up for re-election. It was very convenient that Biden kind of said that when I'm elected, you won't have to hear about me on the news every night. And then as he declined, I think pretty clearly now in his age, that decline was not public. And there were people who knew and who tried to stop people from finding out. And I think it's absurd that things had to happen this way. If the reason she lost is because she didn't have enough time, those are the people who did this. And I think, you know, I highly doubt any of them will ever face any repercussions for it. How could they? But I mean, I guess unless Trump executes all his political opponents. But you know, that's not. I wouldn't really call that justice. The other thing that I think is really really astonishing to me is, like you said, about being asked that question about transgender issues, a completely unforced error. You know, when Kamala Harris was asked about her gender, right? Her kind of pivot to neutrality was that she was going to be a president for all Americans. That was her stance on her identity in the election. I think she could have done a lot more with this idea of being a woman fighting for women. I don't know if that's a winning strategy, but I think that the Democrat version of an approved strategy like that is it's her turn. Again, selling you on this idea that it's a party of expertise, at least aesthetically. I think I keep coming back to the turnout issue because it feels to me like the key, like you need to activate people. So I'm asking myself what activates people based on everything I think I know. And I don't know if it's, you know, some left-wing policies are popular. I don't know if it's left-wing policies that activate people. I think some of that rhetoric does. And with rhetoric, like you're saying, you know, whether it's negative rhetoric or positive rhetoric might make a difference. But, you know, you can just say stuff when you run for president. And all the voters know that. It is an open non-secret, and Obama said a lot of stuff when he ran for president, and as far as I know, you know, a certain amount of that just didn't materialize. And I think looking at our country, you know, if people think they're hurting, which, you know, as far as an experience, an emotional experience, it's a fact, which is kind of my point. As far as their ability to locate the reasons, you can't trust their reasons. But if they say that they're upset or that they're hurting, the wrong response is to tell them no. The correct response is, I think, to give them some kind of story. And you know, Donald Trump caused this is a story that they could have run with. I think when they attacked Donald Trump, they attacked him as a hypothetical. But Donald Trump isn't a hypothetical to Americans. They voted him out last time. He's not a hypothetical, you know? Like I've been binging like more like obscure like TikTok content, and I've watched this guy who does debates on TikTok. He debated a lot of Trump supporters leading straight up to the election. And one thing that I heard from a lot of the Trump guys, and these were just like users, just people. These were not pundits. One thing that they said every time is like, look, the economy's really bad right now. And that rhetoric is mirrored in what the Pod Save guys bring up and what I've been seeing in analysis about this election. But the funny thing is, when asked what it was, one of the things that they said is, look, I just don't like Biden's tax plan. And what the guy brought up is like, well, for the time frame that you're referencing, you were under Trump's tax plan still, and Biden's tax plan hadn't gone into effect. And stuff like that. Can you imagine if you were allowed to say that by maybe nobody stopping her, but just by her own instincts, if she was allowed to like take an issue, and if she's going to point the finger at Trump, if there's going to be the negative rhetoric, and I don't know where I land on whether I think that's a good idea, but if she's going to do that, where's the existing reason, you know? Because the pain is now, not in the future. So you need a reason for the pain that is now. You need a story about why people are hurting now, not why they're going to hurt. Because now you're getting too abstract. Trump the hypothetical didn't save the Clinton campaign, and it didn't save the Harris campaign. So we have to stop running, and I know it's true, and this is going to bog a lot of liberals down. I know they're right, and maybe egoistically they just need to be told that they're right. I get it. I understand That's correct. But like, you need a story. People are hurting right now. What's the reason? You know? They kind of had that for a couple issues.
I think this is a big problem the Democrats have across the board. This is something I noticed. I'm going to get a little bit gifted kid-y. I was in AP English in high school, and we had to study rhetoric in AP English in high school. And if you recall, in rhetoric, there's three kinds of argument. There's ethos, logos, and pathos. And so an ethical argument is an argument from who you are. You know, a logical argument is an argument that attempts to, employ reason, and a pathos argument is an argument from emotional, right? So let's say I'm trying to convince somebody to send money to alleviate a famine, right? I could show a picture of a starving child. That's a pathos. I could say when we send, aid to these people, it makes them like us, and that improves like the global economy. So it's objectively good for our country if we do this. That's logos. And if I say, well, we're a country of people who help other people, so we're going to do that, that's ethos. And I think one huge problem the Democrats have gotten is that they seem to mostly do debate instead of rhetoric. So they try to win points. They try to score, well, I had an answer to what you said, therefore what you said doesn't matter. And this is sort of useful in a high school debate setting, but it makes you come off like a huge asshole if you try to do it to somebody in real life. It makes you come off like a huge jerk, because basically that sort of formalized debate is a game of shutting down everything the other person says in any way possible, whether that's legitimate or not. And rhetoric is kind of a project of trying to make somebody imagine that they already agree with you. It comes off much more kind, even though it's also manipulative.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that Democrats pretty much only use arguments from ethos, especially now. They only do "we're Americans."
Yeah, they are hooked
And
on the ethos. That's very true.
and this is, the Greeks know that this is the weakest form of argument.
That is kind of fascinating. I as you were saying that, I was thinking, like, I wonder if you could take a group of like a group of like I don't know, like Voshites. Like if we took a few hundred Voshites and we put them through the UNSC like Spartan training camp, could we get out like a few dozen Democrat Party staffers who would be able to argue with these people? Maybe they'd say the N-word and blow it all up. I don't know, but I think yeah, I've seen a big distinction between how the major like people who are the biggest on social media who support voting Democrat argue, and like the people who are like more like from the inside of that political machine and how they argue. I think listening to like can you just imagine putting a Trump surrogate, like not one of the normal guys, one of the social media guys, but like one of the like I don't know, like one of their big media guys. Put Sam Cedar on the air next to that guy. I'd love to hear them kind of go back and forth like that.
The rhetoric, I think the fact that they try to run as wonks. They try to put themselves up. You saw, like, no, if Joe Biden doesn't have a degree in foreign policy, he's just that good. And Joe Biden's foreign policy has been just an abject disaster. And I feel like the Democrats think that Americans are too stupid for logical arguments to reach. Like, Like the way, have you seen Kamala Harris's like announcement? Uh,
I have. Which one?
the one 3 months ago from her, uh, for announcing her run for president.
Oh yeah, I mean, I must have. I must have. What about it?
It's hilarious. It says, it spends the first like 45 seconds talking about like the way Republicans view America. They see all this bad stuff. And then it says, and we choose a different America. We choose freedom. And it's such a banal statement that when I it's, we choose freedom, it means nothing, right? Uh, I think the Democrats really think that the way to reach low information voters is with patriotic shibboleths, and that these voters are going to be turned off by uh, by people who come to them and try to explain the way the world works logically. And I think so the Democratic Party, because of this, and also I think they lack the intellectual capacity to do this. I'm calling them stupid here. Um, a good example here is Ukraine, right? I
Sure.
think foreign policy doesn't decide elections, but I think a lot of people were very worried about the wars in Israel and Ukraine. They're very worried about Biden's handling of the Ukrainian war. And Biden has been completely silent on what the United States' war goals are, what the extent of the United States' like intervention in Ukraine is, what the United States is getting out of the conflict even. And if people ask him about it, the only answer he gives is arguments from ethos. They say, oh, we're Americans, we support democracy and freedom all over the world. We're Americans, we support peace in Europe, because we're Americans. They don't connect it. And if you go back to watching like stuff from before World War II, the government spent a lot of time explaining to people, hey, look, if there's instability in Europe, if there's war in Europe, it's going to reach such a size that it's going to draw the United States in. So it's worth spending the time, money, and material in Europe now to maintain peace in order to not have to go and fight a war over there.
Hmm.
And Joe Biden has been very resistant to saying that. I'm not sure why. He hasn't explained to the American people what actually happens when the US sends weapons and equipment to Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, it's a part of that. I think is there's an awareness that some of these Democrat politicians, the more they talk, the more they embarrass themselves. A lot of these people want to be a carbon copy Obama, or they know that, like, when Biden talks, they know that he's going to sound like, yeah, Jack, and when I was, with a kid, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. And he lapses real hard. And I think beyond trying to say anything about him qualitatively, looking at how they will handle that on their end, I think their answer is to kind of veil things.
Is there anything else you want to say?
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of anticlimactic. To end it here, I suppose. I just think that there's this idea, and I think thinking about how human beings work, right? If you have a thought analytically, usually its origin is in a psychological place emotionally, right? Like usually we have a feeling that precedes a thought. And I think the feeling that a lot of liberals have is that other people are really dumb when they disagree with them about politics, and they're right, and people should just listen to them. They should just affect the right, whatever it is, the right posture, or tell them the right decision, and they have the facts and they know the facts and they can tell other people what to do. And the problem is people are, like I said, I call them morons earlier. I don't mean that even, it may be in the way that other people might think of it, but just in the sense that, like, if that's your thesis, then you have to talk to people in a way that's going to connect with them. And I think there's a kind of intellectual or class entitlement that Democrats have, where they're educated and they know better. And there's a kind of moral entitlement where they're obviously the better choice. So how could you do anything else? And the issue there is that presumably at some point you have to promise somebody something, or you have to entice them with something, or you have to give them something. And
you can eventually, if you build being moral and smart into your identity without actually practicing morality and actually practicing intelligence, you can forget those things, which is how you end up with the Biden administration, which has acted tremendously immorally and tremendously stupidly.
Right. And kind of like we were saying about the economy is, like, the threat of Trump right now has been treated like the Harris campaign as a hypothetical of the future. In many ways, when they talk about the reality of the Republicans, usually it's like, the Republicans, and like sometimes they talk about abortion and stuff like that. And I think that that's good. And I think that they should keep talking about it. The willingness to pivot is crazy. The willingness to kind of dodge the Gaza issue and kind of just wait for Netanyahu to just wipe out Palestinians. Because it's not going to, I genuinely think that the liberal establishment thinks, well, this will stop being an issue when they're all dead. Once the genocide is successful and complete, then people will stop bugging us about it, and it'll be like a fixture of our past that we look back on in sorrow, as opposed to like a thing we could stop aiding and abetting right now that would have political consequences. And I think instinctively a lot of Americans have this feeling like, the Democrats would rather keep doing what they're doing. And if they're not offering them something, I'm kind of horrified by what I'm talking about, because the prospect is basically like, if you give an American a burger and you tell them, I'll give you better burgers, but you have to let me kill brown people on the other side of the planet. Can you get a significant amount of enthusiasm out of Americans for that? And does that say something very bad about us and about our future and about the future of the political situation in America and on the planet? That has its own troubles, I think, attached to it. I don't think that Gaza was the issue that decided the election. I don't really think anything foreign policy related, but I do think that rhetorically, it played a role in Donald Trump's ability to be the guy who said for his supporters that I was the no wars guy. I'm Mr. No Wars. Biden, he's got a lot of wars. And he's lying. Donald Trump would have loved nothing better for pride and for ego and for political expediency than to get people killed. But, I just, yeah.
When you go around with Liz Cheney, you can't be the no wars guy. Like, you can't.
It's also, you can't even be the we're a better America ethos either, because that's the thing people are dissatisfied with. So there's kind of nothing. It's an empty vessel, I guess, is what's on offer.
I think a big part of the Obama euphoria was that people who voted for Obama were sick and tired of being ugly Americans. It was like, I don't know how, you remember the early 2000s, probably better than me. But it was Team America World Police. It was a very palpable consciousness in this country that that being an American was something to be ashamed of. And when Obama became president, they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize, pretty much for rejecting the thuggish, scummy scam artist who goes around and tortures and kills and so forth. And for rejecting that as a picture of what America is. And the Democrats, by aligning themselves with Netanyahu, have embraced, and Liz Cheney have embraced being the ugly American. They've absolutely embraced being this kind of like thuggish rogue actor on the world stage. And the Republicans have never stopped embracing that, but it leaves the coalition of people who are really excited to vote for Democrats kind of out in the cold.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, the thing that just popped into my head as you were saying that is like, if I offer you 2 cups, right? I say, here's cup 1, it's full of poison, and you think to yourself, okay, do I get to keep the cup? And I say, yeah, you can keep the cup. Hey, pour the poison out if you want. It's not a big deal. But here's a cup full of poison, and I hand you another cup, and it's full of nothing. And you think, okay, well, this cup at least doesn't have poison in it. And I say, but you can't do anything with this cup. The perception that this is what the Republican and Democratic Party are, I think, deactivates Americans. That one of these things does suck, and it is dangerous, but the other thing is not occupied by anything compelling, and it's not going to be useful to them. So it feels like it's either there's no difference, or like for some of them, they'd probably rather have the poison. And that's going to be a small number of people who are poison enthusiasts, where the poison is racism, misogyny, whatever. But a lot of other people probably won't give a shit. They'll probably be like, wait a minute, so I get the poison cup or the cup I can't do anything with? Why do I care about the cups? A lot of people, when I just phrased that hypothetical, they probably got bored halfway through the question because there's no point. So like, I just feel very strongly the truth of what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, the Democrats, I don't know what it is that they need to offer people, but I think that there's been a crazy degree of arrogance where they kind of think that they can more or less govern however they want or be associated with however they want. At least that's been Biden's arrogance. Whereas, they don't really have to offer people much. Do you have any final thoughts to wrap it up? Any words for our embattled troops?
Before we go, I just want to say thank you for listening. Hope you hear from us again soon. We're going to try to cover sort of political topics and just sort of the world in general, and maybe like a smaller format with just 2 people. I really enjoyed doing this episode. Hope to do something like it again soon. I think it'll be easier to get that kind of stuff out.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
And
stay safe out there.
Stay safe out there.